What if the dream that wakes you up is not finished with you when your eyes open, and every breath you take on the pillow is borrowed from something that followed you out of sleep? Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From rooms that exist only between blinks to alarms that ring in places no one can find, every story is a mystery that crawls from a dream into waking life. And each one carries a clue that you might miss until the final moments. Listen closely and tell me in the comments which story crept under your skin the most, and what you think the last unanswered clue really means. Story 1. The bridge between sleeps. I woke in the middle of the night with a taste of wet iron on my tongue and the sound of a hum that had no source, like a refrigerator heard through a wall you cannot find, like a low choir that never takes a breath. The room was dark, but the hum made a shape in the dark, a ribbon of tone that drew my eyes to the doorway. I had the sense that if I moved too quickly, something would notice. So I lay there, listening, counting the seconds until the hum faded. It did not fade. It grew. I stared at the ceiling and felt cold along my wrists, as if I had fallen asleep with my hands in snow melt. I rubbed them together, and the feeling stayed, not on the skin, but just beneath it, as if the cold had soaked into me. The hum grew louder until it felt like it was coming from the mattress springs. Sleep clung to me like cobwebs. I blinked, and in the space between eyelids, I saw a shape that did not belong to the room at all. A bridge. It did not look like any bridge in the waking world. It hovered in a fog that did not blow, a narrow span of dark wood planks, each one slick with a sheen that reflected no light. The handrails were made of braided rope that was frayed in places, like it had been repaired by many hands, none of them careful. Past the first 10 planks, the bridge became incomplete, gaps between boards widening to black slits where no water moved and no wind rose. On the far side, a figure waited, as patient as a stone. I told myself this was the tale of a dream, the last image clinging to me after I climbed out. I told myself not to sit up, not to look at the clock, because if I looked at the time would start counting down. I failed. The clock was 3:12 a.m., and in the red digits I found a rhythm that matched the hum. 3, 1, 2, tick. The hum pulsed with the numbers, and I began to understand that maybe the clock was not measuring time. Maybe it was measuring approach. The next morning, I told my coworker that I looked like I had slept in a drain. He laughed and offered coffee. I told him about the hum, but made it a joke. The more you laugh at a thing, the less it gets inside you. He said it was probably the neighbor's white noise machine. He said he had a kid, and they ran one at night. I nodded and wanted to believe it. I want a mundane source, something you could knock on a wall about. Something you could complain to a landlord about without hearing how you sounded. You know how, once something is in your head, you start to see it in the corners of your day. A bridge in the shadow between 2 buildings. A rope pattern in the cords behind her desk. I was halfway through an email when I noticed my wrists on the keyboard, pale, and I remembered the cold from the night. When I pressed my thumb to the pulse, it was too fast. Not panic fast, not coffee fast. Like my body was walking somewhere while I sat still, a silent march toward a place I could not see. The second night, I promised myself I would not wake at 3:12. I turned my phone face down. I set a white noise track of rain on the speaker. I wore warm socks, and I tucked my hands under the pillow. Sleep came quick, then steep, the kind that feels like falling through blankets into a well. When my eyes opened, the hum was already there, low and familiar, like a song that knows your name. The clock read 3:12, and the numbers looked pleased with themselves, which is a strange thing to say, but I will not lie. I blinked, and the bridge lived in that blink, as if it had been waiting in the seam of my eyelids. This time air smelled like wet bark. Not the room, the other place. The boards had dark shapes on them that could have been knots or could have been stains. The rope railing had fibers sticking out like porcupine quills. The far figure stood in the same place, but closer now, as if distance had thinned, not by me stepping forward, but by the place inhaling. My wrists were cold again, and I put my hands together to warm them. The cold did not care. Sleep and wake traded places a few times the next day. At my desk, I caught myself blinking too long, and in the black behind my eyes the bridge reappeared, cutting across a fog that did not move. I kept telling myself that it was a normal stress reaction, that I had been listening for the hum, so my brain gave me a hum, that I had feared the time, so my brain gave me that time. But sometimes fear names a real thing. Sometimes fear is a compass, not a flaw. I try to change the rituals. No coffee after noon. Screens off by 10. Breath square counts. I told myself if you can control sleep, you can control where it goes. I slept anyway, down the same steep shaft. The hum arrived again. 312, blink, bridge. This time I saw the first missing plank. It was 3 boards in a small gap that an ankle could step through. Beyond it, a wider slit. The far figure raised an arm. Not a wave. Not a greeting. A slow, deliberate lift, as if testing a chain. You would think I would get up, turn on every light, and play a podcast until dawn. I did not. I watched the hum swell like the air before a storm, and I tried to understand what the bridge wanted. The weird part is that I did not feel threatened then. I felt invited. I felt as if you could walk there and meet someone who understands why your wrists are cold and why your pulse walks at night. I turned over, pulled the covers to my chin, and told myself I was not going to find out. The hum kept singing. Sleep closed over me again, and in that next blink, I took a step. The board flexed and held. My toe touched a knot that felt like a heartbeat under wood. The fog had a taste like penny water. The rope was damp. I thought of my coworker's white noise machine, the neighbor with the kid, and for a few seconds I was certain that was the answer. Someone had picked a frequency my walls carried. Someone had found a frequency that made dreams. I clung to that idea the way you cling to a rail in the dark. It kept me moving. By morning, I had crossed 3 boards. By morning, I had stumbled into the kitchen with my house still around me, but with the smell of wet bark in my nose, like I had walked through a stand of dripping pines. The kettle hissed, and I flinched. The hum was not in the house. It was in me. On the bus, I closed my eyes, and the bridge was there, as if it had learned a trick, as if it could now be summoned by the simple act of being tired. I opened my eyes to rooftops and wires and thought, you need to stay awake tonight. The clock became my enemy and my anchor. I watched it creep through the hours. Midnight. 1, 2. Every time I felt my head bob, I stood. I drank water. I stretched my calves and counted my breaths. A dull ache started behind my eyes, and with it came that cold in my wrists, deeper now, like a band pressing bone. At 3:09, I felt a dizzy wave. At 3:10, the hum threaded the room from nowhere. I whispered to myself, stay, 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 because I had the childish thought that if I was awake at 3:12, the bridge could not come. It did not need my eyes closed. It came anyway, like a film projected over the room. The doorway widened into fog. The rug patterned itself into dark boards. The rope railing grew out of the curtain's edge. I was awake and standing with my hand on the wall, and I was also on the first board, the one with the knot that beat, and the gap before me was wider. The far figure was closer to, more detailed, a person shaped like me in bad light. They raised their arm again, slow, like testing a weight. My wrists ached in answer, and for the first time, I saw a faint line around them, a mark that did not belong to sheets. The next day I called in sick and told them it was food poisoning. I said the word every manager understands. The price of that lie felt small then. It did not stay small. I bought blackout curtains. I duct taped the phone face down. I took a long walk and tried to wear out the edge of my nerves. A woman with a dog passed me, and the chain in her hand made a chime that matched the hum. I felt a spike of anger at nothing and no one. You get short when you are afraid. You get thin. That evening I moved my bed so the headboard pressed against the wall with the neighbor's apartment. I told myself I would hear the white noise machine clearly now, and then I would know this was a human problem with a human fix. At 3:12, the hum did arrive, but the wall was silent. No fun. The sound filled the space behind my teeth, and a thin, cold ring formed at each wrist like the outline of a bracelet someone had once heated and pressed there, then removed. I blinked and saw the bridge. The third and fourth planks were missing now, not just the small gap. I can maybe make the jump. Maybe. When you stand at a threshold, the true choice is not between staying and going. It is between believing you are the one choosing or admitting that the place is choosing, and you're only catching up. I told myself I would step onto the first plank and then step back like you might dip your toe in a pool. I told myself the figure was a stranger, and the bridge was a test, and the fog was a set. I told myself many tidy lies because tidy lies are blankets you can pull up to your chin. I put my foot down. The wood took my weight. The hum sharpened. I leaned for the rope and felt its damp fibers snag my palm, a real texture that left a sting, a small burr caught under skin. I froze and looked down at my hands, and though my room was still here, on top of this, I could see faint lines around my wrists as if something invisible hugged them. The far figure mirrored me. That is when the first part of the red herring did its job. I believed, wholly, that if I reached the other side, the hum would stop. The person would be a guide. The bridge would be a cure. That belief carried me 2 more boards. On the next, my heel slipped, and for a heartbeat, I thought I was going to punch through to whatever was beneath. The gap yawned, and I felt a suction in the air, like a breath taken in through the earth. The rope creaked. My wrists burned cold. I regained my footing, and I laughed out loud, the sound thin and foolish in my bedroom, in the fog and both. I told myself, see, still in control, still you. The figure raised its hand again, slow, and I saw a glint that might have been metal at the wrist. I did not want to know what that meant. The next day my manager called, and I let it ring. When he texted, I turned the phone face down again and told myself I would reply after a nap. I did not nap. I drifted in and out of the shallow kind of sleep where you hear your own name once and have to sit up to check whether you dreamed it. Each time I closed my eyes, the bridge was there, waiting, as patient as weathered wood. The far side remained hazy, but I began to make out a hint of a branching path, as if the bridge did not end at land, but at a platform with choices. I thought that was hopeful. It was not. By night 5, my world had narrowed to the hours before 3:12 and the hours after. I ate cereal over the sink and watched the microwave clock because its green digits felt less smug than the red alarm clock. My wrists ached all day now, a slow, throbbing cold that made typing a misery. The woman with the dog chose a different route. My coworker stopped asking if I was coming in and started sending thumbs up to my excuses. It is astonishing how fast your life can tilt when nothing visible moves. When the hum began that night, it came with a second sound, a fainter thread like a chain dragged over wood. My skin crawled. I tried to speak, to tell whatever it was that I understood the invitation, and I was declining, but my mouth could not find words. I blinked. The bridge waited for planks empty now, a jaw in the middle of a sentence. The figure was close enough that I could see its hair. It wore my haircut. It held its head just like I do when I listen. It did not wave. It lifted its wrist, and I saw the metal shape clear for the first time. A cuff. This should have been the point where I ran. Instead, I chose to treat it like a puzzle. That is how I break myself, and how I fix myself, and here it's the same flaw disguised as strategy. The red herring still glittered. If I could only get across, I could ask the questions. Why 3:12? Why the cold? Why the gaps? I would step, and then step back, a scientist with a sample. You understand the lie of that, I think. You have told it to yourself. I went forward. I counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. I crossed each board like a ritual. At the first gap I crouched and tested the reach. It was just wide enough that I had to push off a little jump that would seem silly in daylight. I made it. Adrenaline tasted like the hum. On the next, I did not pause. Distance felt shorter now, as if the place, pleased, had leaned. The wood flexed. The rope squealed. Somewhere beyond the fog, something that could have been a river moaned once and was quiet. I thought almost there, but did not know where there was. The next part is the moment that will be argued later by whoever hears me tell it. People will say I was asleep on my feet. They will say I dreamed upright. I will tell you what I know. I was standing on the bridge and in my room, both. I felt the draft from the window and the damp from the rope. I could smell detergent on my sheets and the bark of wet trees. My heart was mine, and also walking ahead of me. I took the last narrow step I could take before the gap grew too wide, and I looked at the figure. I understood the shape of their face. I saw my own. It did not feel like looking into a mirror. It felt like looking uphill at someone who had been waiting at the top, tired of waiting, wired with a patience that had worn grooves in their posture. They lifted their wrist, and the metal cuff clinked against the chain. The chain snaked down to the plank beside their feet, and then slithered into the fog where I could not see what it anchored to. They spoke without moving their mouth. The hum took the words and bent them into my ears. "Come finish what you started." I shook my head. Whatever this place was, it spoke the language of traps. Even then, though, I felt a tug of sympathy, a terrible tenderness for the way their shoulders slumped, for the way their eyes, which are my eyes, had a redness at the edges that said they had learned to cry without tears. The red herring dangled again. If I took their hand, maybe we would both be free. Maybe the chain was a formality, a rite you complete and then discard. Maybe this was how you stopped the night from stealing you in pieces. Then I noticed a detail that disproved the lie. In my room, beside the bed, my phone lay face down, duct tape peeling. The screen lit with a call from my manager. The name reflected in the window for a second before the screen dimmed. In that reflection, the person on the far side did not appear. The angle should have shown both of us. It showed only me. I stared from the reflection to the figure and understood something cold. This was not two people meeting. This was one person arranging to stand in both places. I stepped back. The plank sighed. The figure's mouth opened for the first time, and the hum shuddered. My wrists burned like ice. The cuff on their wrist winked. I knew if I turned I would see faint marks on my own skin, the shape of something that had measured me. The rope railing felt stronger now, like it had been waiting, coiled. I could not wake. I could not blink away. The clock in my room clicked to 3:13 and then to 3:14, and still the bridge held, unbothered by time. The choice appeared plain. Step forward and take the offer hand. Step back and fall. There was no third option except standing still, and standing still was only waiting to be chosen by the place. I have always believed that if you make your own trap, you can spring it on your own terms. I leaned forward. The figure mirrored me. I lifted my wrist and saw the faint ring there like frostbite. I said, in a voice that sounded like both of ours, "What happens if I do not come?" The hum smiled at that, which is a sentence that does not make sense until you hear it. I stepped. The plank met me. The figure's chain clinked. When our hands touched, the cuff jumped like a spider and clamped my wrist so fast the pain came as a flash of clarity before it became hurt. The other cuff snapped onto their wrist with a neat sound. The chain moved as if relieved. That was the immediate consequence, and it was honest. A band of metal, a weight, a promise made without words. The delayed echo did not reveal itself then. That came later when I woke. We did not pull one another. We did not wrestle. We stood there with our hands linked by iron and watched as the gaps in the bridge widened with a slow pleasure. The hum climbed in pitch, not to a scream, but to a thin wire that threaded my teeth. The figure leaned closer until our faces overlapped. Their breath was mine. Their heartbeat found a rhythm with mine and then stepped ahead of it, tugging me by the wrist with a half step that was not emotion but an intent. I remembered why my wrists had been cold before. The metal was borrowing temperature. I tried to speak again. A red herring flared once more. I thought, what if the bridge is not a trap, but a border checkpoint? What if you wear the cuff for a moment, answer a question, and pass through? The figure's lips shaped a word I could not hear, and then I understood the misdirection because when they moved, the chain did not move with them. It tightened on me alone. The cuff on their wrist was closed, but the chain's force, the pull, lived in my body. They watched with relief as my knees bent. The rope railing stung my palm as I grabbed it and held myself upright. My room lay around this scene like a cheap backdrop, my alarm clock a red smudge in fog. I thought of the neighbor and their quiet wall. I thought of my manager's call. Stakes piled up in quick order. If I missed another day at work, I would lose hours and then the job. If I told anyone this, I would lose face and maybe friends. If I kept this to myself, I would lose sleep. If I went forward, I might lose my body. If I went back, I might lose the part of me that was already over there, shaking with need. I tried the rope again and felt it give an inch, then settle. The hum dropped, then rose like a crowd deciding to begin a song again. The figure stepped backward one pace, and the chain went slack the way a leash does when the dog has decided you can keep your dignity for a block. I understood the cruel courtesy of that. I was allowed to decide how to be dragged, so I did the only thing that felt like mine. I pulled. The chain tightened, and the cuff bit my skin, and the cold shot up my arm to the elbow. The figure stumbled once, surprised. The gaps in the bridge shifted, sliding like a puzzle that had expected the other move. I dragged the chain toward me until I could put it against the rope, and I wrapped it once, twice, 3 times, a loop that could not hold for long, but might hold for a breath. Then I turned and ran. It was not far. It was a dozen short, mean steps on slick boards. The missing planks did not stop me. I jumped and felt air under my toes. I landed and heard the chain behind me rasp, and the figure make a sound like a cough thrown into the wind. The hum surged. The clock clicked to 3:15. I hit the threshold of the room and flung myself into my bed, into my own body, as if I'd been a foot out of it and now returned. I woke with my heart sprinting and my mouth dry and my wrist burning cold under a band of nothing. My phone lit again. A new text. "Are you okay?" It was from my coworker. I typed, "I am fine," and stared at the lie longer than the words deserved. Then I typed a second message, a strange little confession. "Have you ever woken up with a mark you cannot explain?" He replied with a laughing emoji and a picture of a cat. I set the phone down and looked at my wrist. A faint ring, like a shadow. I went to work that day. I did not do much. I sat at my desk and watched the second hand on the wall clock make its polite way around. Every time I blinked more than once, my stomach dipped. The bridge flickered in and out like a bad channel. The delayed echo arrived then. People spoke to me, but in the glass of my monitor, my mouth moved a fraction late, like my reflection had its own script. When I raised my hand to scratch my ear, the reflection raised its hand to touch the cuff. There was no cuff in the office. My wrist ached anyway. That night, I took the batteries out of the alarm clock. I unplugged the microwave. I taped over the stove numbers. If I never saw 312 again, perhaps the bridge would starve. At 312, the hum came, gentle as a teacher's hand on a shoulder. The darkness folded into fog. The rope rose. The wood waited. There was no way to measure the hour now, and yet I knew it. Knowing is a clock you cannot strip for parts. The chain tugged once, a polite reminder, a billing notice from the other side. I answered in a childish way. I put both hands around my wrist and held. The cuff tightened, and the metal that was not there made my skin creak. The bridge stretched like a cat, and the gaps showed teeth. The figure on the far side smiled like me when I do not want someone to know I am afraid. I whispered to the empty room, "You cannot have both," and the hum replied with a chord that suggested that it already did. I made one last plan. It was stupid and noble in the way only plans made at 3 a.m. can be. I would go all the way across. I would stand where the other me stood. I would look down at the chain, and I would follow it to whatever it anchored to, and I would unhook it. I would break it. I would end the trade. That was the choice that trapped me in the situation, and I made it with a clear head and a tired heart. I rose, and the room rose with me, and the fog did as well, patient as a tide. The boards were slick, but I was good at them now. The gaps were wider, but my jumps were better. The rope burned my palm, but I let it. The hum threaded my bones, and I did not let it pick the tune. The figure watched, expression shifting in a way that made me want to apologize. When I reached them, they offered their hand without triumph. I took it, not out of trust, but to anchor myself for what I had to do next. We stood, mirrored, and for a second the world tipped and became level. There's a trick to chains. You do not pull against them in a straight line. You wind them around something and use angles. I looked down, and the chain did not end in a hook. It sank into the plank through a round hole, as if the wood had learned to grow around it. The iron disappeared into a darkness that did not reflect. I tugged, and it did not move. I crouched, and my reflection crouched, and together we put our hands on the rim of the hole. The cold there made me gasp. Inside the hole, The hum took on a distant echo. I knew then that the chain did not anchor to a stake. It anchored to the part of me that steps first. I do not have a better way to describe it. The chain ran down into a place that held the walking half of me, the one that moves before I. The cuff had not been lured onto my wrist. It had been invited by that half, a handshake in the dark. If I wrenched it free, I would tear something loose that would not grow back the same. I hesitated, and the figure used that kindness against me. They leaned, and their cuff kissed mine, and in that touch, I felt the clink of replacement beginning. I jerked back. The rope railing cut my palm. I straightened and looked at the figure, at myself, at the version of me that had waited so long. I said, if I do this, you get a sleep. You get a morning. They nodded once, slow, grateful. The hum softened. I looked past them and saw the platform I had glimpsed before, a small square of boards beyond the end of the bridge, with two paths leaving it like options in a maze. One path had light, one had fog. The choice looked simple and honest. It was not. I made the trade. I let the cuff take my wrist like a ring at a wedding no one attended. I felt the chain weight settle into my joints, and I saw the other me straighten as if a pressure had lifted off their ribs. They breathed, and it sounded like me when I wake after a nightmare, the small sob at the end of the inhale. They stepped forward. Our shoulders brushed. In that passing touch, I felt a thin line of warmth cross from their skin to mine, a heat that fell into my bones like a lit match into water. Then they walked. They crossed into my room and vanished into it like a man stepping through a doorway he paid rent for. I stood with the chain and listened to the hum sing down the length of it. I tried to pull it free again. It did not budge. The platform waited with its two paths. I took a step toward the lit one, because I am the kind of fool who trusts a friendly hallway. The wood bent into a smile and then snapped flat again. I understood the twist then. This place was not a cure or a checkpoint or a puzzle. It was a set of roles, and I had accepted mine. The far figure had never been a stranger or a rescuer. It had been the part of me that knew how to leave. Morning came in my room. I did not see it. I felt it as a pressure change, a warmth that did not reach me. I felt it as a slackening of the hum that made the fog thin by 1%. The chain tightened and loosened like a sleeping thing breathing. I stood and waited and counted my breaths in groups of 4, because breathing by 4s had once calmed me. It calmed me now, in a small way, enough to think. If the chain had a shape of my world might have shape here. Shapes repeat. I wrapped the chain around the rope again and again, until I had a coil that would bite into itself if pulled hard. Then I walked backward to the thickest plank I could find. I braced my feet. I took the slack out of my arms. I thought of every time I had made a bad choice and lived anyway. I pulled. The chain wrenched and the rope screamed. And for 1 second, I felt it shift in the hole, just a hair, just enough to know that something human still mattered here. Then the plank under my heel creaked, and the crack ran toward my toes like a smile you do not want to see. I let go before it broke. Cowardice saved me, or wisdom did. I still cannot tell. The fog closed in a little, offended or amused. From the room, faint as a radio down the hall, I heard the kettle click. I heard a phone buzz on wood. I heard my name spoken in my voice. It sounded rested. It sounded awake. It sounded like the life I had arranged like furniture. The chain pulled once in a sighing way, as if to say, see, all that work for nothing, and I laughed quiet and real, because laughter is a knife that does not look like a knife. I do not know how long I stood there. Time did not hold shape. The hum moved through intervals and returned, like a tide that has read music. My wrists ached until the ache became a fact and no longer a complaint. I set small goals to keep from sinking. Count to 100, then 100 more. Think of 3 blue things in your kitchen. Think of the taste of mint. Think of the face of the woman with the dog. Think of how chains can rust. Think of how it can rot. Think of how everything endures only until it does not. Eventually, the fog folded and the room returned enough to let me fall. I woke in my bed with the taste of iron in my mouth and a ring on my wrist I cannot show to anyone. I stumbled to the mirror. For a full second, the person in the glass did not move. Then they did, and I did, and the sink returned. On the pillow beside me, an indent where a head had been that was not mine, or had been, depending on how you count. The kettle clicked. The phone buzzed. A message from my coworker. Coffee. I stared until the letters blurred. I went to work. I spoke like a person who had learned the script that morning and was proud to get most of it right. My coworker said I looked better. I told him I'd found the right white noise. He believed me because people like to believe in useful tricks. I did not tell him about the chain. I did not tell him that when I typed, my reflection touched its wrist as if to adjust a cuff. I did not tell him that at 3:12 that night, I would stand again on a damp board and listen to a hum and measure a debt. You want a neat ending. I wanted one too. You want me to tell you that I broke the chain, or that I joined the other me, and together we stepped off the bridge as if stepping off a train. I do not have that gift for you. I have the truth that fits every night since. At 3:12, the hum begins. Sometimes I wake in bed with my wrists cold and the taste of bark in my mouth. Sometimes I wake standing, chain warm, fog reaching, rope biting, and the room printed like wallpaper behind what matters. Some nights I try the rope. Some nights I rest. There is one thread left that I do not know how to tie. Once last week, I woke at 3:06, heart pounding, certain I had felt something touch my forehead. A kiss, light and quick, like someone testing whether I'm really asleep. The hum had not started yet. The bridge was not there yet. My wrists were warm. I lay there in the quiet and held my breath. In the window, where the red digits of the clock should have made a small rectangle, I saw a smudged thumbprint that was not mine. It moved as if wiped from the other side. Now we move to the second story in a moment. If this one unsettled you, let me know what you think the chain anchors to. Story 2. Borrowed breath at 3:03. The first time I heard the slow inhalation, I thought it was mine caught in a loop, like the room had learned my breathing and was practicing it back to me. The second time, I realized the intake came half a second after mine, a careful imitation that kept pace as if afraid I would notice. At 3:03 a.m., my clock's second hand skipped a notch without ticking, and a bloom of condensation appeared inside the window, not outside where the night was cold, but on the room side where the air should have been dry. That is when I stopped pretending this was nothing. You know, the type of quiet that has a grain to it, like sand under paper. The apartment had that. The radiator's throat clicked occasionally, but otherwise it was a clean silence, open and obedient until 3:03. I would wake as if a string had been tugged in my chest. There would be a pause in the world, a breath misplaced, and then the sound would begin from near the window. Inhale, slower than mine, deliberate, like a person learning to swim. My own lungs would answer, and time would stutter, a second unaccounted for. I tried to correct for the mundane first, because that is what you do when your fear is still polite. I checked the rubber seal around the window. I held a square of tissue against it and waited for the faintest flutter. The seal was tight. I put a glass of water on the sill to watch for ripples because I had read somewhere that water tattles on vibration. The surface stayed calm, a small moon frozen in a cheap glass. But at 3:03, every night, the breath arrived and the silence between my inhales filled with company. It is an intimate thing to be watched while you sleep, but it is worse to be matched. I try to throw the rhythm off. I inhaled in threes, then fours, then a hiccup, then a held count, like a drummer testing a new groove. The other breath adapted, slow and unembarrassed, always a fraction behind, as if it were saving itself by copying me. After each night, I woke with a heaviness in the chest that coffee could not thin. Walking upstairs left me lightheaded. Holding a phone call felt like lifting something. I thought of you listening, and I know how it sounds. You are forming the easy answers. Draft from the vent. Old clock with a temper. Sleep disturbance. I made a list of those answers and tested each one like a lock. I taped over the vent. I moved the bed. I replaced the clock with an atomic model that sets itself by radio and does not skip unless the sky tells it to. I even borrowed a humidifier from a friend to drown the air and steam, thinking if the glass fogged for everything, the special fog would not matter. At 3:03, the second hand still jolted, then lied about it. I started noticing other markers. On the pillow beside me, an indentation deepened over a week, a small valley pressed by nothing I could see. Once I woke with my face turned toward that dip and felt a coolness on my cheek, the sort of chill you get from standing near a refrigerator with the door open. The breath at the window had grown braver. It took a longer inhale and let the exhale shiver against the glass until it squeaked. That squeak threaded through my dream and tugged me awake with a feeling like being tapped on the shoulder. The dread loop made a tidy circle. Notice, wait, escalate, almost answer, then open a bigger question. I bought a pulse oximeter, one of those little clips for your finger. I fell asleep with it, planning to wake and see if my oxygen dipped. The display glowed a friendly green. At 3:03, when the second hand skipped and the window sighed, the oximeter showed 99. My screen did not dim. My heart rate barely climbed. Nothing on the device admitted that someone else was sharing the air. The data made me look like a liar in my own bed. Stakes stack even when you do not count them. My boss noticed the yawns and the missed commas in my emails. My sister stopped taking nightly calls because I sounded distracted and let pauses hang like cobwebs. My rent went up. The city air got colder and the room should have gotten drier, but that inner condensation returned precise and round, the size of a mouth that never made a mark. Each morning, after I wiped it away, there would be a faint patch where the glass felt warmer, as if someone had held their face there thinking about me. I had to choose how to live with it or how to force it to show itself. That was the pressure that built. Stay awake and you fray. Sleep and you lend out breath to something that grows bolder. I promised myself one night of observation without panic. At 2:58, I sat up with the lamp on and a notebook open because writing makes me feel less preyed upon. The second hand came to the top. The minute clicked to 3. I felt the tug in my chest, as if a string were tied there and drawn through a ring. My eyes went to the clock, and that is when the red herring convinced me. The second hand stuttered, then leaped, as if a battery were dying, as if the motor were catching its... I almost laughed at the ordinary savior of a cheap mechanism. Then I remembered it was atomic, set by signal, not by a weak spring. The room was already braced around the mistake when the breath began at the window, slow and quiet, and the first curl of condensation rose on the inside pane like a gentle question mark pressed against glass. I addressed it like a person. You are copying me. Why? Answering a window is a good way to feel foolish, but that is also how you soften the edge of fear. The breath matched mine again, and I tried something new. I held my inhale longer than was comfortable. The other breath held too, stubborn and patient. Black dots pricked the edges of my vision, and I had to let go. When I did, I heard the second sound for the first time, not just air but a thin, wet note, a stretch of lungs that had not been used in a while. The room smelled faintly of something green, like cut aloe. That should have been my point of no return, but I let it roll another night. Sometimes we make the wrong choice in a gentle way. I slept, and at 3:03, I felt something touch my lip. Not a hand, the draft of an exhale. My mouth opened on reflex, and a little breath left me without consent. Morning felt like I'd carried a sleeping child across a dark house. I found myself standing at the sink, arms aching, with no memory of the path I'd taken. I missed a meeting. I missed a bus. The day asked me to move, and my lungs said they had already done their shift. I set the trap the following evening. It was simple and arrogant. I cleaned the inside of the window until it squeaked under the cloth. Then I taped a sheet of thin plastic over half the pane to see if the breath fog would still shape beneath it. I set my phone to record from 2:55 to 3:10. I laid out a line of salt along the sill. And yes, I know how that sounds, but the mind likes a barrier it can see. I placed a chair by the window and sat upright, shoulders squared, as if posture could push back a tide. At 3:03, the second hand skipped, and I felt my chest cord pulled. The breath arrived where the plastic was not, as if something respectful had read my trap and chosen to test only the clear space. The condensation ballooned slowly into a print the size of a small plate, then shrank as if a mouth had lifted. The phone recorded the room, filling with my own breath, and a second one like a quieter cousin. When I checked the video later, the audio waveform showed a shadow track behind mine, careful and late. The salt lay undisturbed, which should have comforted me, but did not. I stared at the plastic and noticed a flaw. The sheet had fogged as well. On its underside, a small bloom where the tape was tight. The breath had not been stopped by the cover. It had only chosen not to press against it. That detail killed my favorite red herring, the one where a stray current or leaky frame made the glass sweat. It was not the window. It was the room. It was me. The realization brought an anger that surprised me. I am not generous when I feel managed. I made another choice, the kind that cannot be undone without admitting what you are. I set my alarm for 3:02 and stood by the window before the moment could arrange me. When the second hand neared the top, I pressed both palms to the glass and leaned until my breath clouded it. My reflection met my eyes. I said, very quietly, "Take this from me if you must, but show me the cost." The hand skipped. The room hesitated. For a half-heartbeat, the air felt thin, then my chest burned cold as if the inhale had been taken from me before I could claim it. I did not faint. I did not want to give you an easy fall. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor with my head between my knees and breathed like a swimmer who has stayed under too long. The window cleared. The plastic crackled as it settled. The clock resumed a sensible tick. In the recording, my own gasp sounded like a stranger. The next day, I carried the heaviness like a backpack, the straps cutting in at strange angles. On the bus, I counted breaths and came up short, as if the day had fewer than it should. That was the immediate consequence. The delayed echo came 3 nights later. I woke not at 3:03, but at 2:59, alert and strangely calm, with the feeling that someone had already been in the room and tidied something invisible. The pillow dent was deeper, like a head had truly settled there. The breath arrived on schedule, steady and slow, but this time for a few cycles, it led. I found myself matching it without meaning to, inhaling after it did, copying its pace because it felt logical, then necessary, then kind. I broke the spell by sitting up too fast and coughing until my throat hurt. You might be thinking, call someone. I did. I called my landlord to ask if anyone had died in the unit. He laughed and said the building had seen everything, but he was not a historian. I called a sleep clinic and then hung up when the receptionist asked about insurance. I called my sister and told her I was hearing something at night. She asked if it was a mouse. I said no, and then lied and said yes, because a mouse is something you can trap without changing who you are. I bought traps anyway and learned they only catch cowardice. The thing about the nightly timing is that it trains you. By the 4th week, my body began to tighten before 3:03, readying itself like a runner at the mark. That edge of readiness bled into the day. I found myself pausing in line at a coffee shop because the barista took a breath that sounded too deliberate. I stopped on a sidewalk when I saw fog in a cafe, door from inside, and had to remind myself that kitchen steam. I pressed my fingers into the pillow in the afternoon and watched the dent spring back, and I felt petty disappointment that it did not hold. I decided to go on offense. It was not heroic. It was a tired person making a plan because plans feel like promises. I made a metronome in my head. At 3 hours, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds, I would begin long exhales to starve whatever waited for the free breath at 3:03. At 3:03, I would hold my lungs empty, lock my throat, and let the room look hungry. If it wanted an inhale, it would have to drag me. If it wanted an exhale, it would learn what it asked for. I rehearsed the move during the day until my body knew the shape of it. The night I tried it, the room watched me make my small preparations. I sat by the window, knees tucked up, as if I were crouching to hear a secret. The second hand reached the top. The skip came. The tug in my chest arrived, like a gentle hand on my shirt. I exhaled and held. The need to breathe ran through me like heat lightning, flashes that did not strike, but warned. I counted to 12. My eyes watered. In my ears, a sound like a seashell, but colder. The other breath did not come from the window. It came from the pillow. It was such a light sound, that drawn inhale from just inches behind me, that I almost told myself it was plumbing. Then it shivered the fabric, and my hair lifted. The condensation on the window appeared anyway, a round smudge growing without a mouth near it, as if air could be borrowed by intention alone. My body begged for breath. I held. The room leaned. The minute hand did not move. The second hand quivered on the 3. Time waited to see which of us would give up first. I realized that I had picked a contest I could not win. I broke and drew air, a sharp, painful gulp that tasted sweet. The pillow behind me exhaled with audible relief, a soft release like someone who had been concentrating too hard and finally let go. The condensation on the glass cleared in an instant, as if someone had licked it clean. The second hand leaped and ticked twice in quick apology, trying to make up time. I lay back and stared at the ceiling and felt both ashamed and tender, because whatever this was, it was trying not to die at my expense and failing. That was the misdirection lay bare. I believed the room wanted to harm me. The plausible red herring had been the faulty clock and the leaky window. The deeper red herring had been my certainty that I was being hunted, the detail that disproved it was plain. While I delayed the breath, the other breath did not take it. It waited. It suffered. It refused to rip air from me, even when I starved it. The thing that lived by my window was borrowing, not stealing, and that made the fear worse. There's a kindness you cannot fight without changing. I watched for patterns and found them. On nights when I talked too much or laughed too hard, the condensation spot was larger. On nights when I read quietly, it was small. When I opened the window in the afternoon to air the room, the mark later formed lower, as if the borrower were shorter than I imagined. The pillow dent matched the angle of my shoulder. A thought occurred that I did not like. What if it was not a stranger? What if it was me from a night I had not reached yet, pressing my face to my own glass, grateful? The twist took shape in stages, like print in a tray of developer. First, a day where I arrived at work late and found my computer logged into a file I had not opened. The words on the screen were mine, but spared of my usual mistakes, paragraphs breathing in a rhythm I recognized. Second, a weekend when I woke at noon to find my curtains tied back with knots I do not use, simple square knots my father taught me long ago. Third, the phone alarm I never set, ringing at 3:03 in the afternoon with a chime I had assigned for emergencies. I do not want to say the next part out loud, even to you. One afternoon, I closed my eyes at my desk, just for a minute, and in the warm slip of near sleep, I felt my face pressed to cool glass. I felt the curve of a window frame under my palms, but the view was wrong. An alley with a metal fire escape. I do not have a brick wall with a crack that looks like a river on a map. I exhaled and saw a blur of a person sitting on a bed, head lifting, listening, and their clock on the nightstand read 3:03 a.m. in blue, not red. I opened my eyes with a small cry, and the office looked too bright. If this is where you say I am nuts, so be it. I will tell you the rules as I learned them. At 3:03 a.m., here, something reaches through time sideways and takes a breath it needs to survive. At 3:03 somewhere else, perhaps later, perhaps earlier, perhaps on a day I have not spent yet, I am at another window, palms against glass, and someone on a bed is kind enough to let me take a breath from their room. The clock skip is the price the second hand pays to let the seconds overlap. The condensation forms inside because the exchange happens here, not out in the cold. Once you see it this way, you cannot see it as a haunting anymore. It is a small economy of mercy, but it still takes from you. My lungs adapted in odd ways. I could sprint for a bus better than I used to, but a flight of stairs stole my balance. I spoke in shorter sentences, leaving silences for a partner that was not in the room. I began to write with a cleaner rhythm, as if I had stolen focus from myself in advance. That shame feels strange to admit, but what else is it when you breathe now on credit? So I made another choice. It was neither brave nor wise, but it was mine. I would meet it at the exact second and give it a full inhale, not the scraps around my panic. I would set the terms. I arranged the room the way you would for a guest. I folded the quilt back and smoothed the pillow. I placed a second pillow near the window with the case cool and clean. I sat with the clock in my lap and waited for the minute to come and the second to almost disappear. At 3 hours, 2 minutes, and 59 seconds, I took the deepest breath I could and held it, then leaned forward and breathed it toward the window, a soft offering, a small gift given without fear. The condensation appeared in a round that matched my breath exactly, and then, as if a hand outside had pressed, the second round grew over it, almost the same size, just offset. The second hand paused, then clicked. The room eased. For the first time since this began, I felt rested by the exchange. I slept in a clean fall that had no catches. The fallout came the next morning, not in dread, but in the weight of what I had agreed to. A text from my boss asking if I could open a morning meeting. I almost said yes. Then I looked at the window and saw the faintest print from inside, 2 overlapping circles, one larger, my breath, one smaller, not mine. I wrote back that I needed a late start. I made tea. When I lifted the mug, steam fogged the glass, and for a heartbeat, wrote a shape there that looked like the curve of a cheek against a pane. I touched it with my finger, and it felt lukewarm, like someone had touched it from the other side. I had not solved it. I do not think I can. The nightly exchange continues, sometimes gentle, sometimes clumsy, like learning a dance with a partner who cannot see your feet. The clock still skips at 3:03. I still wake, sometimes with the pillow dent deeper than seems possible for a single head. On one strange night, I turned over and felt heat where the dent was, not body heat, but a kind of echo warmth like the memory of sunlight on glass. I did not turn the lamp on. I did not look to see if anyone lay there. I closed my eyes and matched the breath that matched me. Last week something happened that has left a thread dangling, and I think you might have thoughts about it. I woke at exactly 3:03, not because the clock told me, but because someone whispered in a voice I knew, mine, right by my ear. The single word was please. The window fogged, but on the mirror across the room a small circle formed as well. Hi, as if someone shorter than me had tested if that surface would work. It cleared, slow and neat, and left no streak. I have not moved the mirror. I am waiting for it to choose again. If you have ever felt your throat tug for no reason at night, if you have ever seen fog on a window from the wrong side, you might know this dance. Maybe we all owe a breath to someone we were, or someone we will be. Or maybe I am saying that to make you feel less alone in your own strange room. Tonight at 3:03, I will sit by the glass, palms ready, and I will try to be generous. If I am the one by someone else's window tomorrow, I hope they are listening. Now we move to the third story in a moment. If this one made you hold your breath without meaning to, tell me what you think the mirror means. Story 3. Stairs that only descend the first time I smelled damp earth in my third-floor hallway. I thought someone had tracked in potting soil, a harmless spill after a spring errand. The second time, the scent came at 2 in the morning, rich and cool, like a garden after rain that did not fall. The overhead light buzzed in a steady line that never brightened and never dimmed. I stood there barefoot, listening to a faint scraping that rose from somewhere below the building, as if a shoe were testing a step in slow motion. I told myself I was just awake too late. Then the scraping answered my pause. It started when the landlord changed the locks and left a spare key on my doormat with a use for basement note. We did not have a basement, not in any lease, not on any floor plan. I laughed at the mistake and left the key in a drawer. Weeks passed. My insomnia got worse. When the air in my apartment felt too tight, I opened the door for a walk and found that slip of damp soil, smell moving in the hall again, a breath of night without a breeze. The light hummed like a refrigerator heard through a wall. That is when I tried the key. It fit the heavy gray door at the end of the corridor, a door I had always thought was a utility panel. The lock turned easy, like a hand that had been waiting. The door swung inward to a concrete landing and a stairwell cut from poured walls, colder than the hall, and set with a single fluorescent tube that droned a tired song. A printed sign read basement, but below it, in pencil, someone had added only down. I peered over the rail and saw step after step eating light, the smell of wet soil stronger with each breath. I should have closed it then, right? I went down 6 steps and stopped. The light above me buzzed in pulses, like a patient insect, and the sound made a thin line in my... Somewhere far below, the scraping repeated, a measured drag and plant, as if someone took each stair by habit, not by need. I told myself I was hearing the building settle, old pipes twitching in their sleep. I touched the cool rail and noticed an ugly quirk. There was no 13th step. The metal numbers stamped into the edges went 11, 12, 12 again, then 14. A joke, I thought, or a misprint. The scraping paused, waiting. I retreated then. I am not a brave person, only a curious one, and those are cousins who fight at family dinners. I locked the door and tried to let the key rest in its drawer, but the smell of damp earth ripened each night, and the light outside my apartment never burned out. Even when the hallway fixtures were replaced, that tube kept buzzing, obedient to a power I did not pay for. My sleep shrank to small islands. Each time I drifted, I dreamed that someone was descending just beneath me, one floor lower, always one breath behind, never reaching bottom. You know that feeling, do you not? The first time I brought a flashlight, I told myself I would only count the steps and laugh at the missing number. The beam cut the air into a white cone that caught dust like small planets. 11, 12, 12 again. 14. My hand slid along the rail and felt a patch of cold sticky with some film I did not want to name. The scraping rose again, closer now, a rhythm that matched my own, as if my shoes were making the noise from ahead of me and sending it back. I stood with the light pointed down and tried to hear a difference. My skin prickled when I could not. I picked a rule to keep me safe. 20 steps and stop. 20 and then go home. At 19, the buzzing grew sharper, a thin needle under my nails. At 20, I waited, breathing through my mouth to avoid the soil smell that now tasted like pennies. The scraping eased into place a half beat after each of my lungs. I expected darkness, a sudden fixture failure, the cheap scare of a tube giving up, but the light above me kept working like it had never learned how to die. I lifted my foot for the next step, and the echo lifted too, late and eager, as if remembering. On the third trip, I tried going up instead. The rule held in reverse. 20 steps up, door apartment, bowl of cereal at midnight while pretending this was funny. But each footfall cost me more than the one before. Going up felt like walking through bed sheets soaked in cold water. When I pushed the hallway door open at last, I had lost 10 minutes from my watch. The buzzing light met me, unchanged, and the soil smell pooled at the threshold, as if it had been waiting for my return. My upstairs neighbor's door was ajar by an inch. No light inside, no sound at all, just that steady hum. Did they go down too? I did not sleep that night. When I went back down at dawn, the buzzing had softened, as if rain far away. A new detail waited for me 5 steps below the first landing. A bare patch on the rail, rubbed bright by 1,000 hands, worn in an oval like a religion practiced in secret. Cold bled into my palm the instant I touched it. The scraping answered from below with a new impatience, as if whoever made it had heard a familiar foot and wished I would hurry. I told myself the echo was mine. I told myself it helps to name a fear the wrong thing. You can know a stairwell the way you know a song. By the 8th visit, I could feel its shape in my bones. The treads had a shallow sag in the middle where 1,000,000 steps had taught them to bow. The fluorescent light had a tiny hitch that came every 40 seconds, a barely noticeable blink, not enough to feel like a malfunction, more like a wink from a teacher who cannot interrupt the lesson. The missing number still bothered me. 12 repeated. 14 came too soon. I started counting in my head to see if the printed numbers mattered. At 13, my foot hesitated without being asked. What happens if you try to land where a number should be? I'm ashamed to tell you, I try to find out. That is the curiosity I warned you about. I chose a night when the wind outside the building made the alleys sing, because it helps to have a chorus for courage. I brought chalk and marked an X where 13 should be, a small white kiss in a place the builder had skipped. I took a breath and stepped into it. The rail chilled my hand like winter water. For a moment my weight found nothing, a slice of air where my heel expected iron. Then the stair accepted me with a sick little bounce, like an elevator emptying into a basement you did not ask for. The scraping below me rejoiced, if a sound can. After that, returning to my apartment felt wrong, as if I had left a door open in my own chest. The buzzing hallway light seemed louder. My neighbor's door was still ajar. I texted the landlord and asked who else had a basement key. He sent a shrug emoji and 2 words, old building. That night, when I tried to sleep, I heard the scraping without opening the stairwell door, faint through my wall, like a dream walking with its hands out. Every time I turned over, it turned to a domino with my shape. I whispered into the dark, "Please stop," and somewhere beneath me the sound paused, polite, then resumed. On a Sunday, guilt got me. I called my upstairs neighbor, the one with the quiet door. No answer. I knocked. Nothing. The soil smell was strongest at their threshold, a cool line across the floorboards. I placed my ear to the wood. It was stupid, I know. A whisper came through, as if from a paper tunnel. I could not make out words. The hallway light buzzed louder in that instant, like a radio rising to drown the signal. I stepped back, and the whisper faded. In the silence afterward, the scraping began again, and I understood that one kind of help canceled another. I made a choice that night. Go down until the buzzing stops, then come back. 20 steps had kept me intact, but it had not answered the thing that kept waking me. I drank water, put a spare key and a small flashlight in my pocket, and left my door open a crack because I wanted the building to admit it was part of this. The stairwell air touched my face like a damp cloth. I took the first landing in 3 slow steps. 11, 12, 12 again. Chalk-X faint at my invented 13. 14. The rail had a new worn oval lower down, not yet bare metal, but thinner than before. Had I done that? Or had someone like me? The smell deepened to true soil. It was not rot. It was not mold. It was the scent of a hole cut in living ground. On the 5th landing, my phone lost its signal, then found 1 bar, then none. The buzzing tube above me pitched up for half a second, as if startled. I tested my return by walking back up to the door and back down. The distance changed. Up took longer than down. I felt in my thighs, the way one hill inverts another. The scraping matched every test, late and patient, like a copy that trusts it will catch up. I said hello to it, and it answered by stopping. Stopping is worse. You know that. When only my own steps moved, the stairwell became a cathedral with 1 choir. I risked a shout to see if I could hear an echo. The hum swallowed it like a mother swallowing a child's story when she is too busy. I counted landings. 3, 4, 7. Numbers began to behave badly. The missing 13 had taught them how. I tried to shake the red herring that my building had an ordinary sublevel with old pipes and paint cans, and that all this was what fear does to ducks and dust. Then I saw something impossible. A fluorescent light in the landing below me, buzzing in the same rhythm, with the same tiny hitch, with the same dead bug caught at the edge of the cover. That light should have been different. Even a chain of identical fixtures would age at its own pace. Exact sameness means loop. My stomach dropped like a bucket in a well. I turned and walked back up, counting aloud to make the world bind to the numbers, but the counting became a tune I could not complete. When I burst through the hallway door, the buzzing hit me in the face like the towel in a locker room. My neighbor's door stayed ajar. The key sat warm in my palm, as if it had been clenched by a runner. How long had I been down there, really? I called the landlord and left a message I regret. Angry words are stones you think you can put back later. No callback. I left a note under my neighbor's door, and it lay there all day with no shadow stepping over it. I slept face down to block the sound, but the scraping found its way into my bones anyway. When I dreamed of railings rubbed bright by hands like mine. I dreamed of missing steps that accept your weight, then cost you something small, an ounce of warmth here, a minute there, a word lost when you reach for it. Tell me, what would you trade for an answer that will not love you back? The next descent took me to a landing where the paint peeled in the exact same pattern as the landing 3 above it, a jagged shape like a coastline on a map. That broke the last of my mundane hopes. I sat and listened, and the scraping did not come. The silence bent toward me as if it wanted to be filled. I asked a question. Where do you go? I did not expect an answer. The rail under my fingers grew colder, like a hand that refuses to warm. From below, a single drag and plant, then quiet, then the light above me ticked once without dimming. Time moved around me with care, like a person stepping around glass. At some point, I realized the buzzing had a pattern. Not random, not broken. It pulsed like the breath of a sleeping animal. 5 steady, 1 hitch. 5 steady, 1 hitch. When the hitch came, the soil smell flared, and I felt a tug on the bones of my feet, as if the stairs wanted my weight to join the weight already stored in them. I remembered the chalk X, and how the step had held me a heartbeat late. I remembered the worn ovals on the rail, islands in a river nobody named. The misdirection began to collapse. This was not a way to storage rooms. This was a way to replace a sound with a person. The point of no return came slow and kind. I reached a landing where the number plates had been stripped away. Someone had come here with a screwdriver and decided that labeling was unhelpful. The fluorescent light here had no dead bug. It had no hitch. It buzzed in a perfect tone that made my teeth hum in reply. I looked up. The landing above looked precisely like this one. I looked down. The landing below did too. That sameness is a net. My only choice that felt like mine was to stop trusting up and down. I stepped into the space where 13 would be and kept walking. The stair accepted me like a trap that had finally earned my step. The rail froze my palm to burning. The scraping resumed, but now it came from behind me, a fraction younger, like a student learning a teacher's stride. I descended until the smell of soil opened into true air, a night air without city in it. A draft lifted my hair from my forehead. I rounded a final turn and saw not a basement, but sand, a broad floor of packed earth that drank the light and gave nothing back. The fluorescent tube above me buzzed on, but its reach ended just shy of a dark line on the ground, like a boundary drawn to keep something honest. There was a door beyond that line, wood swollen with damp, iron strap hinges slick with age. It was open to a crack wide enough for a wrist. The scraping stopped. I thought of my neighbor's quiet apartment, the note on the floor that no one had picked up. I thought of the chalk on my fingers and the white kiss on a number that the builder had skipped. I knew the rule of stairs that only descend. You can go down them forever, or you can cross a threshold and change the rules. I bent and pushed the door with 2 fingers. It moved like it hated to. Beyond the door, not a room, but another stairwell, not of concrete, but of packed soil cut into perfect treads, each one held by roots and stones, descending into an earth silence so dense it made my ears ring. There was no light source, and yet I could see each rise and run as if someone had polished dirt into glass. I called out, foolish as ever, neighbor. No voice returned. Instead, far below, a sound like my own foot catching on grit and sliding half an inch, a bad habit I have when I am tired. It was me, but later, or me, but lower. I backed out, feeling my choices turn thin. I tried to go up then. It was like climbing the side of a slow river. Each step fought me with a soft persistence that never quite became a shove. The fluorescent lights buzz stayed even. The dead bug caught in the lens was back. On the landing that returned me to printed numbers, the missing 13 smiled at my chalk X with an innocence I could not forgive. When I reached the hallway door, my hand shook so hard I took 2 tries with the key. The buzzing in the hall met the buzzing in my skull, and for a second everything chimed. My neighbor's door stood open to a dark room that smelled like wet leaves. I did not cross that threshold. The delayed echo hit the next day. I could not find my kitchen scissors. When I opened the junk drawer, my chalk lay there, but the stick was shorter, as if someone had marked something many times. My reflection in the microwave glass lagged a fraction when I reached for the kettle. In the shower, I heard a faint scraping, like tile, from my own stairwell through the wall. It came in time with my heartbeat, a dragon plant, as if I were already walking there instead of here. You can laugh at that if it helps. I smiled at it too, the way you smile at a dog that knows its name too well. I went back one last time to choose. Go down to the earthen stairs and follow them until the soil stops smelling like rain. Or accept loops and live in the hum. In the end, I chose a third thing that is not neat. I stood on the landing of the missing 13 between numbers and listened with my eyes closed. The scraping from below and behind joined into one braid, a sound that tied itself into a knot and then loosened. I placed my hand on the rail where the oval was brightest and felt heat for the first time. Someone had just held it. Maybe me, maybe the neighbor. The tube light hissed and did not fail. I spoke to the stairwell like it was a person and like it was not. If I go down, how long until I hear myself coming back? The buzzing answered with its hitch, 5 steady, 1 skip, and I knew the skip was for me. I lifted my foot and set it lightly on the space where 13 should be, not fully, not a promise, but an offering. The stair held me without that sick bounce. I took my foot back and the scraping continued, happy to imitate. I thought, it is not a place that eats you. It is a place that copies you until you forget which sound is yours. I went home. I shut my door. I slept with a chair against the handle, a ritual with no real power, and I woke to find the chair moved an inch, as if the door had breathed in the night. The buzzing in the hall kept on being reliable. The damp smell came some nights and not others, like weather with a secret map. My neighbor's door is still open. Sometimes I see the note on their floor edge curl and flatten as if stirred by a slow current. I think I know what that current is. I think I know how long a stair can wait. Here is what I do now. When the insomnia comes, I count 11, 12, and after that I say 12 again in my head because naming the missing thing makes it less hungry. I do not step into 13 anymore, not completely. I stand on the landing and touch the worn oval on the rail and wait for the scraping to catch up. It always does, and it always pauses when it reaches me, and in that pause I hear a kindness I do not deserve. Then it goes on, and the humming light keeps us company, and the soil scent rises like a memory of somewhere kinder than this. 2 nights ago, a new detail arrived, and I do not know how to file it. The buzzing stopped for one breath. A silence that had nothing inside it opened in the stairwell, wide and careful. And in that silence, I heard a voice from below say a single word. Home. It sounded like me. It sounded tired. It sounded pleased. Then the buzz returned with a soft flinch, and the scraping resumed, and a faint smear of soil appeared at the hallway threshold like a footprint you can almost see. I have not told the landlord. I have not moved the note. I'm waiting to see who comes up first. Now we move to the 4th story in a moment. If these stairs pressed on your chest while you listened, tell me what you think the missing 13 wants. Story 4. The window that opens inward the first time the window rattled at 2:44 a.m. It sounded like a coin rolling in a thin bowl, a quick circle that stopped too fast, as if a hand on the other side had steadied it. The second time, the latch lifted and set itself down without a draft, and the glass made a shy cry like a fingertip dragging a clean line. It was a hot night with no rain, yet the room smelled like wet pavement after a storm. I lay there, counting heartbeats and telling myself I was awake enough to be safe. Then something tapped the pane 3 times like fingernails, patient and polite, waiting to see if I would. The apartment came with old things that pretended to be permanent. A painted radiator that moaned in winter. A sink that coughed before it ran clear. The bedroom window had been nailed shut from the inside by someone with a careful hand. 6 small finishing nails set flush and painted over. Good news, the landlord had said, the frame swells in summer. Better to keep it sealed. The latch still rattled on humid evenings, though, as if lightly shaken from the other side. I stayed because the rent was low and my job was remote. I told myself that a sealed window makes a room safer, not stranger. I was not sleeping well even before the tapping began. Work had me up past midnight, answering messages from a different time zone. A friend said I should move the bed away from the wall because old buildings breathe and the plaster talks. I tried that. The first night the bed was centered, the tapping followed it, a mobility I did not enjoy. At 2:44 the latch chattered like teeth, and the smell of rain swelled the room, even though the weather app showed a clear sky. I pressed my palm to the glass and felt cold that did not belong to August. On the inside of the pane, there were faint fingerprints I could not line up to my own. I cleaned those prints twice. They returned in the same place and angle. as if a hand had tested the size of the world and found it unchanged. The reflection in the glass started to bother me too. It lagged when I moved. If I raised my hand, I could count 2 slow beats before my reflected hand reached the same height. It was subtle the way thirst is subtle until noon. I told myself the delay was an illusion caused by streetlight and double pane, then remembered I had single pane and nails that made this forever. The latch lifted on its spindle again. Not high, just enough to say still here. The tapping grew conversational. 3 taps on the first night of the week. 2 taps on the second. Then a long, smooth drag, as if someone wrote a letter with a fingernail. The smell of wet stone came and went in soft pulses. I did not notice the time first. My body did. I would wake in the dark with a dry mouth and a stitch under my ribs. I would look at the clock, and the time would say 2:44 exactly, and I would think that is a coincidence that can only repeat a few times before it becomes a calendar. The window would tremble at the latch as if trying to unlearn habit. I looked for the comforting answers. The building had a fire escape, so I checked for scuffs on the outside sill. It was dusty and quiet, with no shoe marks and no signs of birds. The neighbors upstairs were quiet lately, a change I chalked up to vacations. I put flour on the inside sill to catch prints. At 2:44 the latch ticked, the tapping came, and the flour stayed smooth as new snow. In the morning there were smears on the inside glass shaped like a hand that had fogged it and wiped it clean. The smears were longer than mine, as if the fingers had tried very hard to reach through. I tried to record it. I propped my phone up on books and let the camera point at the window from 2:40 to 2:50. I turned off the screen so I would not stare at the seconds and turn my face into a countdown. On playback, the room glowed a grainy gray. At 2:44, the latch in the blur rose and fell by itself, precise, with no hand near it. A shallow fog bloomed on the glass from the inside in the oval size of a mouth. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself sleeping and then not sleeping. The reflected me sat up 2 seconds after I did. My stomach sank with a clean, thin dread I do not recommend. A friend said I was hearing my own pulse in my ear and watching a phone artifact. She told me to eat salt and drink water and stop chasing ghosts that do not pay rent. I nodded and then lied and said I'd slept well. That night, I stacked books against the frame like a small fort. I told the window out loud that I was going to ignore it and that it should take the hint. At 2:44, the latch lifted and the books shivered in place, each vibrating a little, a tiny, sympathetic dance. The tapping came anyway, gentle against the glass, not angry, not impatient, a metronome that had discovered manners. I pressed my ear to the pane and listened for wind. There was no wind. The cold came through without moving the curtain. It felt like laying a wrist on a bag of frozen peas. My eyes watered. When I stepped back, the reflection did not. My face remained close to the glass for half a second, mouth open, as if it had chosen to stay and smell the rain. Then it snapped back to match me with a little jerk of the chin I recognized from home videos. I rubbed my temples and told myself to stop waking at 2:44. The clock laughed in red numbers. The nails in the frame looked flatter each morning, as if the paint was tiring of keeping their head small. I tried a tape test. I ran blue painter's tape along the seam and drew a pencil line across the tape and frame so I would know if anything shifted. At 2:44, the latch sang a short high note. The tape stayed flat, but the pencil line on the tape and the pencil line on the wood no longer touched tip to tip. There was a hair's width of offset, a mismatch small enough to blame on my own hand. I felt a mean pride for having noticed it. The reflection stood there smiling a second late. On the inside glass, new prints bloomed. They were shorter this time, closer to mine. There's always a story you tell yourself to keep from picking the worst possible one. Mine was that someone had a key and was teasing me from the fire escape. Cruel and ordinary, easy to fix with a new deadbolt and an email. I sent the email. The landlord said the escape ended at the floor above and that my window had no exterior landing. He sent a photo from a street. My window was a neat rectangle 3 stories up with nothing under it but crisp air and the wish of a staircase. I stared at the picture and felt the reasoning part of my mind fold once and put itself away. When the tapping came that night, it was different. It tapped once, then answered itself from inside the glass a second later, like an echo that has learned new tricks. The smell of rain grew bright, not musty, like it had just struck warm asphalt and jumped back into the air. I touched the pane and followed a cold trail that felt like a draft running in a curve. But there was no actual air moving. The curtain hung straight and still. The cold had a path and the air did not. That was when I understood a small, wrong fact. The window was opening, but not the way we think windows open. The nails did not lift. The frame did not flex. The pane itself eased inward like the skin of a drum pressed by a slow hand. The glass did not bow out into the night. It bowed toward me, tightening and then releasing like a held breath. The latch rose to make room for this, as if it knew this movement from long practice. I took a step back. My reflection did not. It leaned close to peer at the place where my hand had been. For 3 heartbeats, we were out of sync. Then it turned its head toward me, and the delay caught up, and we were one again. I whispered, "What do you want?" as if a window could hear. The answer came in a soft staccato on the glass. "Top, top, top." Then a small pause, and the same 3 taps, but lighter, more distant, like someone drumming their nails against a matching pane in an adjoining room. I palmed the latch and felt a tremor run through it, a minute thrill like static before a kiss. The cold climbed my wrist to the elbow. My body made its own choice then. I backed away and climbed onto the couch and watched from there like a child who has made a fort too far from the door. At 2:50, the room warmed by 1 degree as if the window had sighed and decided to wait. The next day, I taught myself to be rational again. I researched thermal contraction, frame warp, and pane resonance. I read 300 words about single-hung sash windows and wanted a prize for my attention. I taped a thin piece of foil to the bottom of the frame and set a bowl of water on the sill so I could watch ripples if air. At 2:44, the foil did not lift. The water stayed smooth as a held breath. The latch rose anyway, and the pane swelled inward again, and the smell of rain returned like a delivered letter. Inside the window, someone had touched the glass and left prints that lined up to mine if I cheated with my pinky. I started talking to the reflection when I was too tired to pretend it was me. I asked if it slept. I asked if it was hot where it was and whether the rain smell felt good. It tilted its head a breath after I tilted mine. It mouthed the words I had just said as if repeating them for comprehension. Once, very late, it shook its head when I shook mine, but then it kept shaking after I stopped. A slow no, that was not quite no. The fingertips on the inside glass had a slant that did not match my hand. I know the way my fingers curve. These belonged to a person who wrote with the other hand. The red herring that made the most sense then was sleep paralysis. Is the tidy box people hand you when you say your room does tricks. But I could move. I could stand beside the radiator and feel its paint sticky on my calf. I could scrape a nail against the glass and leave a mark. I could roll tape across the frame and hear the sticky hiss. Sleep paralysis does not let you kneel on a sill and smell rain that you do not get wet from. It does not bend pencil lines on tape without moving the tape. I crossed sleep paralysis off my list with a kind hand and a bad pen. I left town for 2 nights for work and convinced myself this would cure me. The hotel window opened outward, and the air smelled like bleach and citrus. I slept hard and without dreams. When I came home, the apartment felt relieved, like a dog that can finally drop a ball. The bedroom was cool. The air had that faint rain flavor, not strong, more like a memory. At 2:44, the latch ticked once as if clearing its throat. Then the tapping came in a quick, shy rhythm, like someone practicing how to speak in a house where a baby sleeps. The pain eased inward, then out, like a person hesitating at a door. I sat up and said, "I am here." That was the point I could not undo. I walked to the window and pressed my palm flat to the glass. From the other side, something matched it, fingers aligning to mine with a heat that surprised me. My reflection lined up perfectly for the first time in weeks. No lag, no late smile, just me right there, hand to hand through a membrane that should have been impassable. The nails along the frame made faint sounds like small teeth tapping in a jaw. I slid the latch up and down to feel how much it wanted to rise. It lifted easily, just shy of its catch. I knew if I pulled, the pain would come toward me like a door that opens inward. I left it locked that night, but the choice had already been baked. The next day was the longest day in the world. I tried to work. The cursor blinked like a signal from a lighthouse. My friend texted a video of her cat and asked how the ghost hunting was going. I typed, "I think the window wants to come in." Then I deleted it because that sentence is a good way to get uninvited to things. Around sunset, the smell of wet stone arrived and sat in the corner like a guest who has decided to stay until breakfast. At 2:44, the latch lifted and held. I told myself my plan was to prove a mundane cause by removing the nails and showing that the frame tension was the true culprit. That is a kind lie, and I will not ask you to believe it. I used a butter knife and a flat screwdriver and worked the painted heads one by one, a quiet pry that popped each nail with a soft sigh. 6 small silver shafts dropped into my palm, warm from their long sleep. The pain ticked and eased another quarter-inch toward me, as if it had been waiting for permission to breathe. I held the latch and whispered, "If this is a mistake, let it be my mistake." When I turned the latch and pulled, the window did not creak. It did not fight. It came forward like a hand reaching for mine after a long argument. Air flowed, but it was not outside air. It was room air with a blue coolness baked into it. The smell of rain without the humidity, like a memory replayed with better mixing. Beyond the pain was not the night. It was a room. My room. Same bedspread, same crooked picture frame, same glass of water half drunk on the nightstand. But the light was different, a gentle silver that had no source. On that other sill, a row of small handprints fogged the glass from inside, then cleared as if embarrassed to be seen. She stood in that room. She looked like me would look in a mirror after a year that changes your face. Not older, not younger. Edited. The reflection delay was gone because there was no reflection in it. It was another person watching me through the rectangular mouth we had both made. She raised her hand and placed it where mine had been. Her palm was warm. Her fingernails clicked once against the glass, and I realized that all the tapping had been her saying hello the only way she could in a house built to pretend windows never move. I thought she would be cruel and take what I had. I thought she would grin with my smile and step through and let me age behind glass. I realized then how often fear is just pride in disguise. She did not smile. She looked exhausted in the way I looked after a week of answering messages after midnight. She mouthed one word, slow enough that a person in a storm could read it. "Please." Her room smelled like rain, stronger than mine. Her radiator paint had bubbled away. On the inside of her pane, there were scratches near the latch where someone had tried to wedge it with something too soft to work. The red herring I had cherished died neatly then. No intruder from the fire escape. No prank. The outside of my building was below and to the left in both rooms. This was not outside. This was a hinge. I asked a stupid question because stupid questions are how you find out if the ground is real. "What time is it there?" She looked at a digital clock on her nightstand. It said 2:44 in blue. Mine said 2:44 in red. We both laughed, and it felt like someone had let us keep something. She touched the inside of her glass with her fingertips again, and the prints on my side lined up, then slid past, shorter to longer, longer to shorter, never quite perfect. I had to choose then, and the choice could not be undone. Close the window and let this become another story I do not tell, or open it and learn what consequences stick. I'm not brave. I'm simply tired of standing in doorways. I said, "I will open it if you do," and she nodded like a person who has already tried all the polite things and is now ready to try the desperate ones. We both turned our latches. The glass pulled away from her frame the same way it had from mine, inward, as if this design had always been part of the world and someone had just forgotten to mention it. There was a moment of resistance when the edges of our openings met. The air thickened as if two songs were finding a harmony. Then the rectangles matched, and the world made a noise too low for ears. The smell of rain flared like a struck match. She stepped forward, and so did I. We did not collide. That would have been easy and funny. We overlapped for a second, and I felt what she carried, and she felt what I carried, the way boxes bump in a moving van and learn each other's weight. It is strange to feel your own heartbeat twice, one lagging half a beat behind, then catching up. She did not take my place. We stood side by side in my room that was now our room, and we breathed the same air and did not die. The pane remained open between two frames that did not touch. Over her shoulder, her room had a picture frame set straight where mine tilted. Over my shoulder, mine had a water stain on the ceiling where hers had a clean white patch. The difference made my eyes swim. She reached into my room and touched the glass of water on my table and lifted it with a little laugh of relief. It came free, like it had always been hers to take. She drank and cried a little, more confusion than sadness. The immediate consequence came quick. The apartment temperature dropped 5 degrees, a neat, even slide that made my arms pebble. The radiator thunked like a hand knocking on a wood table. My phone on the nightstand lit, and then went dark, and then lit again, as if a caller could not decide whether to press the green button. The delayed echo took a little longer and felt meaner when it arrived. In the morning, my friend texted and called me by a nickname I have not used since high school, the one I stopped answering to after a bad year. When I wrote back, my grammar slid toward the way I used to type at 2 in the morning when I could not find a full stop. I was borrowing from myself, for she was, and the debt kept no ledger I could read. We tried small experiments. She put her hand through the opening and touched the wall of my room. It was solid and indifferent. I put my hand into her room air and felt a humidity that did not match the smell of rain. A mirror leaned against her wall at an angle that made the rectangle look taller. When I looked into it, my face lagged again by 2 heartbeats and then matched, as if the delay lives wherever a reflection is too patient. We did not step all the way through. Some lines you sense without seeing. I asked what she wanted. She said to stop hearing the tapping and to sleep. We nailed the windows shut. Both windows. We did it together at noon, when the air felt least likely to make new rules. We used fresh finishing nails and clean paint and pressed our fingers flat to say stay. We laughed when the nails made tiny brave sounds that were almost musical. That night, at 2:44, the latch rattled anyway, a crisp little refusal. The pane bowed inward and pressed against the nails without moving them. The tapping came, but from a mirror across the room, not from the window, as if a habit had taken a new route when a door was closed. I stared at the mirror and saw our reflections move, mine a breath before hers, then hers a breath before mine, a duet that could only travel one direction at a time. The next nights grew odd and careful. We talked at the open glass in whispers, and in the middle of sentences we would lose words we needed because the other room had borrowed them for a heartbeat. The smell of rain shifted to a smell like cooled stone in a church. The fingerprints on the inside pane began to look like a family had visited and tried to press themselves into the calendar. My friends stopped calling because my messages were too strange to comfort. My landlord asked if I had removed any windows. I said no. He believed me because he had not imagined the correct sin. The twist crept up like a polite cat. One afternoon, I found a box of small nails in my kitchen drawer that I did not recognize buying. The butter knife I had used as a pry was in the sink with muddy streaks, like a person had tried to wedge something that was not wood. In her room, she held up a hammer that looked like mine, except for a scratch on the handle I did not remember making. We looked at each other and understood at the same time. We had both already done this before. If not us, then the versions of us who came before. The nails that kept the windows shut were love letters from ourselves written in metal. That knowledge hurt the way truth sometimes hurts and then heals. It reframed the fingerprints. Those prints were not an intruder's. They were mine, or hers, reaching for a promise we had already kept and forgotten. The tapping was not a threat. It was a reminder that a door had once been kind. The reflection delay was not a glitch. It was the hinge warming up. None of that made the choice lighter. We were still two people separated by a rule that instruments could not measure. At 2:44, the latch rattled with a new energy that made the hair on my arm stand. I heard a voice from the mirror say a single word in my tone. Home. We did not open the window that night. We lay on our beds on either side of the glass and watched the ceiling explore different whites. I asked if she remembered nailing it shut the last time. She said she remembered the smell of paint and the way the bead of it gathered at the nail head like a pearl that would never roll. I said I remembered nothing except the tapping and the delay and the way the pain bowed inward like a held breath. We fell asleep with our hands on the glass, and I dreamed of standing in a rain that did not wet my clothes, laughing because my hair did not frizz. The last thing I will tell you is a thread I have not tied. 2 nights ago, I woke at 2:44 before the latch could make a sound. The smell of rain was softer, more like wet paper than stone. In the mirror, our reflections were perfectly in sync, which should have been a relief. The tapping came from inside my phone screen, a light tick I felt in my palm. I turned the screen over. It was dark, but warmth pulsed through it like a small heartbeat. From the other room, she looked at her phone too. The 2 black mirrors faced each other through the open glass and did not show anything at all. The window stayed shut. The latch did not lift. Somewhere a coin stopped rolling. Now we move to the last story for tonight. If this one made you glance at your own window, tell me what you think the nails were meant to keep in. Story 5. When the alarm rings twice, the first morning the alarm rang at 6. I smacked it quiet and felt the day fit around me like a shirt still warm from the dryer. The second morning it rang at 6 again. I silenced it, sat up, and heard the same digital chime come from the nightstand 7 minutes later, cheerful and wrong, like a neighbor greeting me in my own voice. I turned the clock over. No second alarm was set. Still, at 6:07, the little speaker sang as if it had learned a secret I had not, and for a moment the room felt tilted, as if everything in it had slid a careful inch while I blinked. Have you ever felt a day crack right where it begins? I told myself it was a glitch. I held the buttons and reset the time. I unplugged it and watched the digits die, a little red sunset in plastic. The phone handled the morning after that. At 6 o'clock, its chime tapped my ear, and I rose, assured and ordinary. At 6:07, my dead alarm clock, not plugged in, not alive, rang with the same tidy tone it had used the day before. I froze with one sleeve on and watched the dark screen vibrate, unlit, singing anyway. The sound came from inside the plastic, not through air, like a voice trapped in a box that had found a leak. I pressed my palm to it and felt nothing. The room smelled like warm dust, steady and small, the way mornings do when you plan to behave. By the third day of the double ring, other small differences waited for me. My keys sat on the dresser, not on the tray where I always dropped them. My pen lay uncapped, a thin line of ink born on the cover of a magazine I do not remember reading. The towel hung on the bathroom, hook inside out. I scolded myself for rushing and made a new rule. Everything back in its place before bed. It is a grown-up spell that usually works. At 6 o'clock the spell held, and at 6:07 it unraveled by one stitch, gentle as a breath on a mirror. A second tone, a second beginning, a second me almost. The number 7 started showing up like a polite chaperone. 7 emails queued after I thought I had closed my laptop. 7 crumbs on the counter by the toaster, neat as a constellation. 7 steps from bed to door, even though I have counted 6 for a year because of the way the rug slides. You may laugh, and I hope you do, because counting is a rope I hold to keep from floating. The rope frayed where the second alarm hit its teeth. Each morning, there was a 7-minute gap where the room felt slightly wrong. Picture frames the same, but not. The coffee a fraction cooler. The air smelling faintly of fabric softener I do not buy. What would you say to yourself in that gap? I started dreaming a dream that folded neatly into the days. In the dream, I wake, I silence the alarm, I stand, I brush my teeth, and then I wake again, the toothpaste still sweet, the brush dry, the alarm ringing, pleased to meet me for the first time. I wake twice, and the second waking holds. That would be a punchline if the residue did not follow me into the kitchen, where the cereal box sat open to the same page of its little back panel puzzle, twice finished in pencil with my handwriting, and my name missing one letter, as if I had signed in a hurry and the day did not insist on full names. My neighbor on the landing caught me one morning and said he liked my new jacket. I said I had not bought one. He said I had worn it yesterday when I left early. He said it looked like my old jacket, but the zipper was shiny, like I had taken better care. He laughed and apologized for sounding creepy. He had yawned the same way I do when sleep pulls behind the eyes. I smiled and lied. I said I had been up at dawn because of call. Then I went inside and folded my one jacket with a dull zipper and stared at it like a dog in a mirror. Who had he seen leave at 5:53, 7 minutes before my first ring? I tried to cheat the morning by waking at 5:50. At 5:59, I stood in the hallway, shoes on, keys in the tray, phone face down so its light would not name me. At 6 o'clock, the alarm in the bedroom rang to an empty room, and I watched the doorway to see if I would now enter from nowhere. Nobody came. The chime cut off when it learned I was not there, which should not be possible. At 6:07, the dead alarm clock on the nightstand sang again, and in the hall mirror I saw my hallway reflection move a fraction late, as if I had just walked by and had not. I hurried down the stairs and hit the outside air like a swimmer climbing out, shivering with an effort that had not quite begun. It felt like I had been beaten by a game I did not understand. That night I set traps. I balanced a penny on the alarm clock so the slightest vibration would knock it down and announce a cheat. I placed a strip of masking tape across the dresser drawer to see if it would tear. I wrote the word mine on a sticky note and put on the mirror where my face would have to meet it. At 6, I woke, the penny fell to my palm, and the tape remained unbroken. At 6:07, the clock rang from dead plastic, and the penny rattled in place without falling, as if a hand steadied it. The tape had a new crease, like someone had pressed on it lightly while thinking. Mine looked back at me from the mirror in my handwriting, and then, for 1 second, the letters rearranged themselves to mean a small joke I did not have the energy to appreciate. I tried a different angle. I asked a question out loud, the way you do when you pretend you are alone. Who are you? Why 7? The clock did not answer. The room waited like a courtroom with no judge. At 6:07 a.m., second alarm answered instead, the same tone, the same cheer, and in that tone I heard a rhythm like the memory of boots on stairs. I told myself I was hearing patterns because the brain gets bored and makes ghosts out of shapes. I told myself this was a glitch in a cheap speaker and an expensive heart. And then the keys moved again, and the towel turned again, and the jacket on the back of the chair faced the wrong direction, as if I had shrugged it off with the other arm. The dread loop kept a polite schedule. Notice, wait, escalate, offer a hint, then open a bigger fear. I bought a power strip with a kill switch and plugged every device into it. I flipped the red toggle down the night before and smiled at the dark. The apartment purred with its own silence, a soft hush that felt like a cat settling. At 6 o'clock, my phone, running on battery, woke me as planned. At 6:07, with the strip off, the dead alarm clock sang anyway, and the oven clock across the room lit up just long enough to show 6:07 in a clean green the first had never seen in that display. Then it went dark again, polite as a guest bowing out. My spine prickled, a little storm under the skin. Do you know that weather? Stakes climbed from comic to mean. I arrived late to work 3 days in a row because I sat on the bed listening for the second ring, and then trying to act natural, and natural cost minutes. I wrote good morning in the group chat twice without noticing. The second message 7 minutes after the first, word for word, punctuation identical down to the polite period. My manager texted me a question with a tone that warns you the next conversation will be about professional. My neighbor asked if I was okay. He said I had walked past him in the hall without saying hello. He said I had smiled, small and private, like a person who has already had the day. I told him it must have been the headphones. He glanced at my empty ears and nodded anyway, merciful. On Friday, I made a choice I could not unmake. I set the alarm for 6 o'clock, then set a second alarm for 6:07. Not on the dead clock, but on my phone. I decided to meet the echo on purpose. I wanted to see what happened if I invited the wrongness to sit. At 6, I woke and stayed in bed, hands folded, listening to the heater tick. The light outside the curtains had that neutral blue that knows what your face looks like before coffee. At 6:07, my phone chimed and my dead clock chimed in unison. The sound braided like a duet that had practiced. The air in the room cooled by 1 degree. The picture frame shifted on the shelf by the width of a dime. I held my breath, and the room held it with me, tender and strange. Then I heard the softest sound, a zipper or my jacket, a fraction of teeth kissing teeth, and my keys lifted off the tray with a whisper of metal on wood. I sat up too fast, and the blood swam. I called out, quiet, because the mouth knows how to talk to an empty room. I said, "I hear you." The keys settled again without a clink, as if placed where they belonged by a hand trying to be kind. My phone screen lit with a message I had not typed yet. It said, "Leaving now." It was addressed to my manager, who likes punctuality the way a guard likes locks. I deleted it and wrote, "Running late," and hated myself for the sentence I live in. The red herring I had married for comfort had been theft. Someone was coming in. A roommate I had forgotten. A sleepwalking me. A neighbor with too much nerve and a long screwdriver. I changed the locks. I slept with a chair braced under the knob, like a teenager in a story that ends badly. I kept the keys in my pocket while I slept, a cheap ring of metal that felt like a shield. It was sweet, that faith in small things, and it earned me one quiet day. At 6 o'clock the alarm rang, and nothing dramatic happened. At 6:07 the dead clock sang from the nightstand, and my pocket warmed where the keys lay, a heat like a closed palm. The chair against the door did not move. The second morning began anyway, whether I opened the door or not. How do you stop a day that does not use hinges? I decided to reverse the pressure. If the 7-minute gap belonged to someone else, I would occupy it. I set my alarm for 6:06, a rude time, and when it chimed I stood and stepped into the kitchen 1 second before the dead clock could sing. I touched everything. The pan capped. The towel righted. The jacket turned. I left a note to myself on the counter that said I was here first. I watched the minute tick to 6:07 with my hands on the counter like a runner at a line. The dead clock rang, stubborn and normal, and the note on the counter had different handwriting now, still mine, just narrower, as if tension had sharpened it. It said no, I was. The point of no return came on a Tuesday, disguised as ordinary. I dreamed the double dream, woke, stopped the first alarm, and instead of waiting for the second, I started the shower. When I stepped out with a towel around my shoulders, my phone screen showed a photo of my front door taken from the outside at 6:03, time stamped and clear. The mat was crooked to the right, the way it was when I first moved in. My neighbor had texted, "Why are you leaving so early?" and my heart got small in my chest like a fist closing around a coin. I wrote back, "I am home," and watched the 3 dots of his reply jump, pause, jump. He wrote, "Just saw you." I could have chosen to ignore it. I could have decided that I am the original and that whatever leaves early is the echo, and echoes are not debts. Instead, I made the complicated choice, the one that leaves marks. I would stop the second alarm before it could ring. I would silence it at 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 59 seconds, and hold the day in one hand. I stood at the nightstand with my finger over the button. At 6:07 exactly, the dead clock rang anyway. My finger pressed to silence, the tone blooming through the plastic like a flower under glass. In that same second, my phone vibrated with a photo from the neighbor of my back walking away. My jacket zipper looked shiny like a new tooth. Confrontation is a kind of prayer. The climax for me did not look like shouting. It looked like sitting on the edge of the bed at 6:07 and saying, aloud, "Am I stealing your 7 minutes, or are you stealing mine?" The alarm answered with its tidy chime once more, then cut off mid-note, as if embarrassed by noise. The air thickened and cooled, like a grocery store aisle where the freezer doors are new. The picture frame on the shelf straightened by itself. My phone lit with a text draft that I had not written, but would have. It said, "I will be in early today." It hovered for a second, then undid itself, letter by letter, like a ribbon pulled back through a knot. A person stood in the doorway then. It was me in the way your voice sounds like you when you hear it recorded and hate it. Same height, same hair, same jaw set, but the zipper on the jacket was bright and the keys lived in the other hand. Their eyes found mine and did not widen. They tilted their head the way I do when I already know the answer, and am waiting to see if you will say it. We both lifted our hands at the same time. We both said, "Stop," then smile because of the echo, because it was funny and wrong, because if you do not laugh, you will drown in the smallest. I asked what you are. They said, "What you are at 6:07. The voice was mine and not mine, a late light arriving through the same window. I said, "Why 7? They said, "So nothing tears." They stepped forward and the temperature dropped 1 degree, neat as a proof. The keys in their hand rang like small bells. They crossed the room and stood where I was standing, and the sound of the dead clock faded, as if embarrassed to be overheard. I reached for the keys, and they offered them the way you offer a handshake. The metal felt warmer than mine. The ring had 7 keys, not 6. One fit a lock I do not have. The twist like a string pulled tight. The second ring was not a prank. It was a relay. The day had 2 starts because 2 versions of me were sharing one morning, spliced at a 7-minute seam, so neither would rip. The person who left early was not a thief. They were paying the debt I had created in a month of snoozes and late starts and short goodbyes. The room had adapted. The alarm was a bell across a cut. At 6:07, the world handed the next me their minutes like a baton. I had felt robbed because I was being replaced, and I was being replaced because I had asked to be one small decision at a time. Do you see it now? I made my last choice quietly. I set my alarm for 6:07 and turned the 6 o'clock off. I told myself I would be the second one, the clean start, the version who leaves early and fixes the zipper and straightens the frame. I fell asleep with the keys under my pillow like a child who believes in medals. At 6 o'clock, the dead clock was silent and the room held its breath. At 6:07, the tone rang once, clear and thin, and I rose into a day that felt borrowed but kind. The picture frames were already straight. The towel already hung right side out. The jacket zipper shone. I left a note for whoever wakes first next. It said, "I will cover this one. Rest." The immediate consequence felt good. I arrived early. My manager's mouth did not make the tight line. My neighbor waved and said, "There you are, the version of you that smiles in the morning." I smiled because it was easy. The delayed echo landed 3 days later. I woke at 6:07 and the room had moved too far without me. The coffee machine was already warm. The group chat had a cheerful good morning with my name on it, time stamped at 6 o'clock. A photo of the sunrise lived in my phone that I had not seen. The jacket smelled faintly of a street I had not walked yet. I felt grateful and replaced at the same time, which is a flavor I cannot recommend. I have not solved it. I do not think it wants solving. Now I live by a small ritual that keeps us both gentle. I set one alarm. I listen for the other. On days when I need the minutes, I leave them. On days when I have them, I take them. I keep the keys on the tray, and I do not count how many there are. I straighten the picture frame once and let it tilt if it wants to. When my neighbor says he saw me earlier, I say, "Good, I'm trying." The dead clock stays on a nightstand with no cord and a shy smile. At 6:07, if I'm still there, it rings. If I'm gone, it is not need to. One thread is left loose, and maybe you can help me tie it. Last Sunday, the second alarm rang at 6:07 p.m., not a.m., a single polite chime that came from my pocket while I waited in line at the grocery store. I checked the screen. Nothing. I looked up and caught my reflection in the freezer door glass, half a beat late, nodding to someone behind me I could not see. When I turned, no one stood there. The freezer hummed, all the doors closed, all the pizzas asleep. Back home, my keys lay on the tray, 7 neat teeth pointing the same direction, and the jacket zipper shone like it had learned a new color. If the day can start twice, maybe it can end twice, and if it ends twice, which one do you remember? If any of this made your fingers hover over your own alarm settings, or if you have ever heard a clock sing when it should not, tell me what you think the 7 minutes are for. Some dreams end when the alarm goes off, and some keep following you into the day, borrowing your breath, moving your keys, or asking to be let in. Tonight, we've walked across bridges that never finish, shared our lungs with something that shouldn't breathe, descended stairs that copy our steps, opened windows that lead to rooms not our own, and heard alarms that ring for someone else. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you for listening in the dark. These are just stories, but the best ones feel close enough to brush your skin when you turn the lights off. Which one haunted you most tonight? Was it the double ringing alarm, or the reflection that refused to stay in sync? Let me know in the comments. I always read them. And remember, the dream that wakes you might not be finished with you yet. Sleep well if you can.